Welcome to the Toastmasters Podcast, the official podcast of Toastmasters International. Hello, everybody. This is Greg Gazin. While Toastmasters began in 1924, women weren't admitted as members until 1973. Since then, they've made a lasting impact on the organization's leadership. In fact, in 2025, 4 of the 5 top board of director members, the executive committee, are women. And as a truly international organization, none were born in North America. With International Women's Day coming up on Saturday, March the 8th, we couldn't think of a better way to honor all women than by dedicating today's episode to them. Furthermore, we are honored to have our Toastmasters immediate past international president with us today to speak with us. She is Morag Mathieson, distinguished Toastmaster, self-employed professional development consultant, and chair of the child sponsorship charity Living Water Germany. She previously led pharmacy operations in Scotland and Northern Ireland, managing strategy, service development, and business growth. With an MBA from the Open University, she also served on pharmacy boards in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Beyond her professional career, she contributed to USA Girl Scouts Overseas in South Germany, overseeing finance. A Toastmaster since 2006, she's a member of Erlangen Toastmasters in Bavaria and has held top leadership roles within the organization, including the role of international president for the year 2023-2024. And a fun fact, Morag is Toastmasters' second ever international president from Europe and the first female international president from outside North America. Morag will also be moderating, coming up on March the 5th, a very special and free webinar entitled Women Reflect on Leadership Journey, featuring a live panel discussion and Q&A, along with her 3 female Toastmaster board members. Morag is also featured, along with these other ladies, in an article by Laura Amen in the March 2025 issue of the Toastmaster magazine entitled Leadership Skills at the Top, How Toastmasters Roles Shaped 4 Women on the Executive Board. Coming to us today from Marendorf, Germany, past international president, distinguished Toastmaster, Morag Mathieson. Welcome back to the Toastmasters podcast.
Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Oh, it is great to have you back, and perfect timing with International Women's Day coming up, and of course, this special event, which we'll get an opportunity to talk about in a little while. Now, last time you were here was back in 2023 at the start of your term as international president. I want to thank you for your leadership, and to kick things off, it was Toastmasters' 100th anniversary, and just to put you on the spot, what was your biggest highlight of your term?
Oh, that's such a hard question, Greg. There were so many highlights. Having the privilege of being international president is amazing. And to be international president at the Centennial Convention was even more special. And I think one of the moments I will always remember was my last duty as international president, and that was chairing the annual business meeting with thousands of members in the room and online. Having the privilege of facilitating the organization doing business at that momentous occasion is something I will always treasure.
It certainly takes a really good leader to chair that type of meeting. Now, Morag, most people join Toastmasters, but very rarely do they say on their first day that I'm joining Toastmasters because I want to be president of the organization. What was it that triggered your desire to take that journey to the top?
Just as you rightly say, Greg, most people on their first day would never say, I want to be international president. And I think if someone had said to me today, on that first day, you could be international president, I would have run for the hills, I think. I would never have had the confidence to believe that I could actually fulfill that role. I was only the 8th woman ever to be elected international president of Toastmasters International. So there weren't many role models or history or track record running before. And for me, my journey in leadership through Toastmasters has been one of being tapped on the shoulder a lot of the time, being very willing to contribute, but not always believing that I had the confidence to be the best person in that role, that there was probably somebody else who was more able, more ready than I was, and not acknowledging just the contribution that I would be able to make. And gradually working the program and working through, I think you open doors. You open doors of discovery about the organization, but also about yourself. I don't think anyone on day one is ready to be international president. But as you walk through that journey and you gradually see more, you learn more, you grow more, you become in a position where it actually is a tangible reality. I remember as a newly elected district director being at international convention, and one of our past presidents came to me and said, "Would you consider running for the board someday?" And I said to him, "I've got to cut it as the district director first." I could really only think of the next step. And having served my district, then seeing, well, I wonder what else I could do now. I've done all of these things. I happen to serve as region advisor, although you don't have to do that to become international president. And then afterwards, several people who saw something in me saying, "Would you consider running for the board?" And after my 2 years as an international director, again, that realization, that feedback, the support from others who helped me to see this just might be possible and that I could make a contribution. Because for me, that would matter. I would only want to take a role where I felt I could make a positive contribution. And so it really, maybe compared to some people, came quite late for me. Probably that realization of international president is possible and that's something I'd really like to do really only came at the end of my service as an international director.
Well, obviously, you took your baby steps, but you made it all the way to the top. Now, what you just shared, I think, is applicable to everyone, but I'm curious, how did the experience impact you, particularly as a woman?
Like I said, Greg, there weren't many female role models who had gone forward as international presidents, partly because we didn't have women as members officially until 1973. And then, of course, it takes time from becoming a member to becoming a person in a senior leadership position. So there wasn't all of that. And therefore, when you look around, the role models, a lot of the role models are men. And we have some amazing male role models around us who can show us just what is possible in these positions. I probably was slightly different to some women. I'm a little bit unusual. If I go back to my student days, I studied a science degree where 80% of the class were female. And I entered a profession where flexible working was the norm, which accommodated a female dominated workforce who also wanted to raise a family and do other things. And I was able to step into a leadership position at work really pretty quickly after completing my professional training. And so for me at work, it never felt like there was a glass ceiling to opportunity, unlike many of my friends. And when I'd come into Toastmasters, I hadn't experienced gender barriers in my club or as I progressed through district leadership. It only changed a bit when I began to run for international office. And people started to ask me the question, did I think I would be able to have my voice heard as a woman in the board of directors meetings? And I'd never really thought about that being an issue before. But then that's when you start to look around and you start to realize how few women have really made it through in that space. And today it's amazing. Half of our international directors are women and half are men. And so then that's when, for me, that moment of, do you think you'll be heard at the table? I start to have those doubts about maybe there are people out there who are more able than me. Maybe there are men. There are a lot of studies that show that men have a lot more confidence generally, and this is a generalization, have a lot more confidence about their abilities than women often do. And those little things are the things that sometimes stop us progressing.
Now, obviously, you didn't stop. What was it that told you can do this? You can keep going.
It was the support of great mentors around and people who believed in me. Some amazing people, some who've been past international leaders themselves, and others who are members in my club or members in my district, in other clubs in my district, for example, that I'd worked with over the years, who were able to point me to the facts, because that's often what happens, isn't it? When we tell ourselves those stories of, I don't think I can, is that we tap into emotion and we stop looking at the evidence. And these were people who were able to say to me, look at that situation, look at what you did there, how you did that. Isn't that going to be amazing that you would be able to bring those skills to the board? You have what it takes. And I think that's what great mentors can help us with in such a positive way, especially if we are more inclined to go to the emotional doubting ourselves rather than the evidential. You can do this.
I agree wholeheartedly. So you talked about the perspective from a woman's perspective. Now, the article, Laura Amon's article, makes a specific point about your fellow board members, lady board members, not being born in North America. How did that impact any of your decisions? How did that impact your leadership style over your term?
I think every president and every board member is unique, because we all come with different life experiences, different work experience, different family, different capabilities, different outlooks, perspectives. So we are all really unique. And I think having served in all of my time in Toastmasters has been outside of North America, I had a very outside of North America centric view coming onto the board at the beginning, realizing very quickly, I used to hear people say, you districts overseas. That to me felt a bit distancing.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it when I heard people say overseas, you're overseas Toastmasters. Like, what does that even mean? And realizing that for me, North America was my overseas, as in somewhere that's far away from my experience and my understanding. And therefore, I very quickly have to get to understand this, because when you serve on the board of directors, you serve the entire world. Yes, you will have a special perspective of where you've come from and of your culture, but you're serving the entire world. You're making decisions that impact the entire world. Therefore, you better get to know it pretty quickly. And that was a huge realization for me. The other side of that is, as you said, I was the first woman from outside North America to serve as international president. And I remember when I was elected as international director and was the first woman from continental Europe to serve on the board of directors, many of the Toastmasters I knew around Europe came and said to me, we are so grateful that you did, because you did, we know it's possible if we want to do that. So it's demonstrating that opportunity is there. And I think if you can find your courage and you find the opportunity and you are able to do these things, then you really can set a track for others to see what's possible should they choose to follow in your footsteps.
And you're, of course, certainly an example of what is possible. Now, we shared this on your last visit when we spoke back in 2023, and we'll certainly encourage people to check out episode 236 from September 2023. In that episode, one of the things we had asked you about, one of your leadership principles is never close the circle. And I'm just wondering if you could maybe, again, share that, what that phrase means, and why is it so core to you, and why is it so important to everyone?
Thank you. Never closing the circle means we can always add to ourselves. If we never close the circle, it means that we always keep a welcome for others to come. And that's for others who may be very like us or who may be nothing like us, because we know that we have this incredible flexible program with all of the opportunities that it brings, that molds itself to the individual when the individual chooses to engage. So never closing the circle means everyone can come and try and discover for themselves. just how much they can develop, they can grow, how they can help themselves to open doors. And by never closing that circle, it means that we are always giving that gift to others. And as we do that, and as people join the circle with us, they bring their depth of richness to us, whether that's the richness of their experience, their capabilities, their points of view. I have been challenged and changed by so many people that I have met in Toastmasters because they see the world differently to me. And it stops me in my tracks every time it happens. As I look at that and think, yeah, there's really another point of view there. I need to rethink. And I think that makes me stronger. And I think it makes our decisions better when we are open to others.
Those are definitely four powerful words. It's funny as you're speaking, and I didn't think of this the last time when we spoke back in 2023. When you say never close the circle, what popped into my head was this image of a pie. And someone says, well, okay, instead of saying there is a finite size of the pie, each person gets their piece. It's almost like if we can make this pie almost a never ending size, then
Mm-hmm.
there's always more room for others in there. I'm not sure if that's if that relates to it, but that's just what popped into my head.
Isn't that interesting how different that we all see? I've never thought about never closing the circle as a pie, but I will now.
Because I'm just thinking when we talk about, especially with business, right? There's a certain, everyone gets a little piece of the
Mhm.
pie. Well, if you make it a bigger pie, everybody gets more share, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you talked about mentorship, you talked about your role in Toastmasters, but you've also had a very successful career taking on leadership roles in high profile organizations. How did Toastmasters impact your journey outside of the organization?
Mm. As I think I've alluded to already, one of my challenges was going to that emotional place and lacking self confidence or self belief that I would be good enough. That I always thought, oh, there must be somebody else who's better. Even if I was really good at something, I would always think there's bound to be someone else who's better than me. And being in Toastmasters gave me that confidence to actually acknowledge my own abilities. And so for me personally, part of my Toastmasters journey involved a complete career shift in leaving corporate world and of taking on the leadership of a child sponsorship charity that's based here in Germany, and where I have to deal with the authorities. I have to deal with finance, legal, all kinds of things in a language that is not my first language. So I'm having to learn the language, learn the culture, become familiar with all of that. And the Morag of a few years back would have looked at that and thought, there's bound to be someone else who can do it. I don't have the confidence to do that. I wouldn't do that well. Instead of thinking, I can find a way through this. I may not have all the answers, and I didn't have all the answers, but I have the confidence to know that I can make the plan. I can ask the right questions. I can ask people. I can work this through. I know I can do a good job. I just may need different kinds of support in different places. And needing that support is a sign of strength, not of weakness.
That's awesome because a lot of people specifically join just to improve their communication skills. You were already a confident speaker when you first joined, but yet you found that you could still grow significantly as an individual, and you certainly have. So, Morag, with International Women's Day coming up, I understand that you have some particular insights that you learned from your research.
That's right. I was fascinated to learn that International Women's Day actually has been observed since the early 1900s, the beginning of the 20th century, which was a time of great expansion and turbulence in the industrialized world. And there was this huge population boom at that time and a lot of different ideologies coming into play. But one of the other parts of backdrop there that was happening was the kind of unrest and debate about women and women's place in society, particularly thinking about oppression of women and equality of women where they worked. And gender pay is still an issue in many, many places. And so the actual first International Women's Day was observed in the USA in 1909 and then very quickly began to be celebrated in other countries, starting in Austria, Germany, Denmark, Switzerland, and growing and growing. And finally, in 1975, the United Nations also adopted International Women's Day. But by the end of the 20th century, so just under 100 years, International Women's Day had really diminished a lot because feminism was seen to be no longer such a popular topic. And when we think back to the 70s and 80s also, but particularly 70s, where feminism was huge around the world, and then to suddenly in such a short space of time see that it was no longer such a big topic, but there was still a lot to be achieved in gender parity in different places. And so in 2001, I believe it was, in the beginning of the new century, it was decided to relaunch International Women's Day so that it would be dedicated to the advancement of women worldwide, celebrating and making visible the achievements of women, and a real opportunity for women to connect around the world in different kinds of activities and to gather around a theme. So this year in 2025, the theme is Accelerate Action for Gender Equality. And that accelerating action will be seen in lots of things that we do, helping people to just become much more aware of women, in our case, women in leadership, and also celebrating the achievements of those women.
Well, that's fascinating. Again, I would have thought it was something that came from the 70s, but it started a lot earlier. This would be a great opportunity for you to maybe tell us a little bit about this, the leadership webinar that you're moderating. What's it all about and what can people expect?
I am so looking forward to that webinar, I have to tell you. I am excited to share that day, to share that screen with the other three women from the executive committee. First time in our history where we've had 4 women serving concurrently on the executive committee. And we're going to have the opportunity to celebrate ourselves as leaders. After all, that's what International Women's Day is all about. It's about celebrating the advancement of women. And we'll have the chance to celebrate ourselves, to share some stories, to share how Toastmasters has helped us to grow as leaders and the impact that all of that has had on our lives beyond, and some special messages of encouragement for other women who are seeking their way forward in leadership.
That's wonderful. What's the process going to be? How is it going to work? Can you share the names of the panelists?
The panelists that will be with me, I'm moderating the panel, and the panelists that will be with me will be our International President, Radi Spear, our International President-elect, Aletta Rocha, and our second Vice President, Gauri Seshadri.
Oh, that's wonderful. And the format, is it entirely a Q&A?
It's Q&A light, let's call it that. It's more of a conversation together. So there will be questions that we will discuss, but it is really a conversation with us. And there will be the opportunity for questions moderated through a chat function on the webinar. So depending on how much time we have left and how many questions there are, hopefully we'll get to some other topics there that people are interested to ask about.
And we'll certainly put a link to register in the show notes. My understanding is that registration is limited, but I understand that if you sign up, you can also get a copy of the recording. And I believe it's taking place at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. Now, I know some people might be working or may not be able to attend. So make sure that you do register so that you can be able to access the recording after the fact. And also, folks, if you found this episode valuable, I encourage you to share this with your friends and family and fellow Toastmasters. You can get the Toastmasters podcast at toastmasterspodcast.com, toastmasters.org, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts. And again, don't forget to sign up for the leadership webinar. And also check out Laura Amon's article, Leadership Skills at the Top, How Toastmasters Roles Shaped 4 Women on the Executive Board. And you can find that in the March 2025 issue of the Toastmaster magazine. Morag Mathieson, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. But before we wrap up, could you perhaps share some final words of wisdom or one piece of advice for that special woman who wants to take that first step or perhaps a next step on their leadership journey?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I think one of the things I've come to realize in leadership and as a woman in leadership is that I'm often very hard on myself. And I think as women, sometimes we do that. We expect so much of ourselves that sometimes we don't notice the progress that we're making. And progress, however small, is still progress. So acknowledge and celebrate each small step you're making on the way. You don't have to go on day one to the top position. You just have to take your time at your own pace and have great people around you that will help you to acknowledge and celebrate those small steps of progress and the big ones that you make too on the way. And you will get to where you want to be.
Well, that's sage advice. Once again, Morag Mathieson, Past International President, thank you so much for taking the time and looking forward to the leadership webinar coming up on March the 5th.
Thank you very much.